And it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. And Heather, what is on store for today? Lots of news this week.
Let's do it. So let's talk about the Harris-Walz interview, Trump's latest antics. Where does the election stand? I think those are some good topics.
Well, they are. And I thought that Harris-Walz interview was actually just fine. I know it's been criticized in some quarters as not substantive enough. But she did, I think, exactly what she needed to do, exude competence and sort of a solidity and not get into details, not stir controversy. What do you think?
That's it. I would completely agree. I think it was a tick the box, right? Everyone had waited so long and the right had put so much pressure on it and it's all so silly. And she was rehearsed and she had good sound bites. Was she the most amazing interviewee I've ever seen? No. Did she need to be? No. And also, it's a TV interview on a Thursday on CNN. Next. Let's do know?
That's right. Next. Well, there's a kind of a next quality to all of this because, so many Democrats that I speak with, really across the Democratic spectrum, are saying, we don't want her to get too specific on policy. We don't want her to put herself into a corner. We don't want the typical Democrats list of policies for this and that and for everything else. We want her to get elected. We want to get rid of Donald Trump. We'll do anything. And I think that's the spirit.
And we've talked about
we should take this in.
Right. But it's also new. So we haven't seen them together in an interview. So that was a sort of test. They're doing message testing. What sounds good, what lands, how does she frame things? So I think all of that was terrific. And what I love is Donald Trump on Truth Social. Boring is what he declared in the middle of it, which is a win as far as I see it.
I think it's a big win because, this whole week, Donald Trump, what has he been talking about? He's been talking about trans boxers. And it's amazing. Bacon. He went a whole thing on windmills. He's been diverging onto Al Capone. Do you remember the little riff on Al Capone? This man is actually, not only is he getting more and more unhinged. We've known he's unhinged for a long time, but he's not talking about policy at all. The only thing he mentioned about policy is that he thought IVF should be free. I mean, hello?
Yeah.
I mean, think of this as Donald Trump, how far he has come. He's trying to get as far away from anti-abortion as possible, saying IVF ought to be free or mandated as part of people's insurance.
That's it.
He's going off the deep end. And Heather, he cannot find an attack line on Kamla Harris. I mean, he can't make it that she's part of the Biden-Harris. It's just old stuff because she represents such new energy and a new beginning. He can't make it the border because she's coming across as, the prosecutor, and she's done a lot on the border. He's flailing. He can't find it.
Yep. And this week, it's been so much. I mean, QAnon and amplifying sexist messages. On the one hand, none of this is surprising. This is all old news. On the other hand, it's so exhausting to watch it again and again and again. And then he says, 6 weeks for abortion. Maybe that's a little, I don't know. I think I'm going to vote against that in Florida. I mean, this is a man who is on his heels, right? I think at the RNC, he was feeling confident. He was in this, he had whatever it was, this horrible assassination attempt, but he was confident. And this is a man who is not feeling good about where he stands.
Now, whenever we get into this kind of a discussion, it gets me a little bit nervous. I worry that we're going to jinx something. The polls, to the extent that polls can be believed, are looking better and better in almost every state. Even in states that, in Nevada, I think there is a tie. Arizona is a tie. Nevada, that she's slightly ahead. In many of the swing states, she is now moving into the range of 3 or 4% in advance of Trump. But these are not huge differences, and I'm not going to relax until we get to see something like 6 or 10 or even 12%.
Are we going to get? I would love to see some 12%ers in there. That would be incredible.
Well, Wisconsin is almost there, but we need to get there because you see the post-election strategy for Trump is obviously to contest this election and try to get it
Oh, yeah.
back in the House of Representatives. So the biggest, I mean, a margin of 10 to 12% may be necessary in order
Right.
to lay to rest any of that.
No, of course. And then there's the Electoral College, right? And we've talked about this, and we're not the only people. But it's so interesting to see what's happening in Texas, right? Allred and Cruz are closer than people thought, probably. And it's interesting. It feels like the Republicans are on their heels there, too. We have Attorney General Ken Paxton is sending people, raiding homes of Latino Democrats and activists, some of them. It's so interesting what's happening there. How much attention should we put on Texas?
Well, I never paid much attention to Texas in terms of the presidential vote. But obviously, if Texas starts getting into play, that is big news in and of itself. That would be terrific. Now, Heather, we also have the September 10th debate coming up. I think that's going to be a big, big tentpole in terms of where things stand and giving the public another opportunity, in fact, their real first opportunity to look at Trump and Kamala Harris together.
Right. Well, if we look at this past week, I mean, we'll have someone on stage who is rehearsed and sane and thoughtful and empathetic and highly intelligent. Speaking of disposition, she said Joe Biden has the disposition to be doing what he's doing. And then we'll have this man. I mean, what happened in Arlington Cemetery this week is yet another example of the mayhem. Go ahead.
Well, it's actually important. I'm glad you brought that up because the Army on Thursday, the U.S. Army rebuked the Trump campaign for violating the law. They were told when they went into remember, they went in on Monday. They went into the Arlington National Cemetery for a photo op. Trump wanted to, it was the anniversary of the third anniversary of the exit from Afghanistan. And what he wanted to do was talk about what a blunder Biden had made. And he wanted to indirectly blame Harris for the same thing. But what happened is they blew up into his face because he was told by employees of the Arlington National Cemetery, which is the most hallowed ground, almost sacred ground to Army veterans and to the country, that you can't do a political event here. It's against the law. It's against our regulations. And what happened was that Trump's people evidently this employee, a woman, she tried to stop them from going in. They used some set of abusive epithets. We haven't seen or heard exactly what they were, but it was reported again and again. And then they shoved her. Now, I want you to think about this, Heather. I mean, think about shoving a woman, abusing her verbally to get what they want in terms of kind of using the military heroes to advance Trump's cause. I mean, think of how many particular triggers this sets off in terms of our memory of the worst of Donald Trump. You know, abuse of women and abusive and talking down and demeaning military heroes and violating the law. I mean, it's all there. It's all Trump.
It's so shameful. And one would think that the goal was to set his records right, to do some spin on the fact that he's calling our military veterans suckers and losers. But then he goes in, he botches the whole thing. The video they did. So the whole thing was right. They're not supposed to do campaign events, of course, at this cemetery. But then also you're not supposed to just be willy-nilly taking photos with your thumbs up of everyone. And then they put this video out on TikTok, which was not a great video. I mean, really a bad video. So the whole thing was for a video, and then he pretends it's not.
Well, you know, in my experience, Heather, in political campaigns, and, this is not my first rodeo, what happens is that relatively small things, like the Arlington Cemetery fiasco, get blown up. Why do they get blown up? Because it's not so much the thing itself. It's what it represents about the candidate. It's the story behind the story. And that's why all of this became a big deal in terms of everything from harassing women to violating the law to using violence, shoving to get his way, to violating a sacred space and violating norms and laws. It's all there. It's all Trump.
Right. And I want to go back to this TikTok idea. So this video goes up on TikTok. It's been so interesting to watch TikTok in particular.
Are you watching TikTok?
I mean, here and there. It's part of my day job. I'm not doing it for funsies. But so recently, the Harris campaign is spending way more money on social and social ads than the Trump campaign and other Republicans, which are doing more traditional media buys, which is, we could talk about that. But I think the trends on TikTok are so interesting. And Tim Walz, we've talked about this, lends himself to a meme. It's glorious. I mean, it's basically Tim Talk instead of TikTok at this rate. I mean, he's doing well on the platform. He has way more. I think he's at 1.3 million and JD Vance is at 500,000, I think, in terms of followers. And Tim Walz's likes are way higher than JD Vance's. But what's interesting is there's similar kind of view counts to the Trump-related content and the Harris-related content. But 2/3 of the Harris-related content is positive, and 2/3 of the Trump-related content is negative at this point on TikTok.
Well, this is important, particularly with regard to younger people. And hopefully younger people are going to vote like mad in this election. Because they are not only seeing the truth about Trump and the anti-Trump ads, but they're making these ads. They're creating this content for TikTok and for other social media, and it's a wonderful thing to behold. I mean, it's creative. It's relative to they're all becoming part of our political culture, not just as voters but as producers.
That's it. And there was lots of content creators at the DNC, and that created a little kerfuffle in terms of traditional journalists and versus, allegedly, I'm not sure there's a versus, but these content creators and kind of who was getting special looks and who was getting more attention. So that was interesting. Now, so we've talked a little about where the election stands. We've talked about some of these polls, the Bloomberg poll that came out. I mean, it's interesting. You know, Trump is watching these polls. You know he is.
Oh, he's not only watching the polls, he's watching all of these metrics that he uses, crowd size, the number of donations, the number of people who are actually volunteering, the enthusiasm, on every metric he has ever used. He is falling further and further behind, and it must be driving him absolutely nuts.
It must be. The Walz campaign, $540 million raised in their short 5 weeks, is it now?
I mean the Harris-Walz campaign, yeah, $540
Oh, sorry,
million.
what did I say?
No, $540 million is extraordinary. And in a way, you can look at this as kind of three acts, a three-act play. I mean, act number one, she gets, Biden drops out and she creates this extraordinary campaign, including picking Walz. Act number two is she unifies the Democrats behind her, and that happened by the end of the convention. And act number three is right now she is trying to unify the country behind her. This tour of rural America, I mean, a lot of Democrats initially, scratch their heads and say, why rural America? Well, I think part of it is that she wants to show that she is the candidate for all the people. This is no longer just the Trumps against everybody else or the Republicans against Democrats. This is a new beginning. And it almost feels, I don't want to get too enthusiastic, but it almost feels as it did before your time in John F. Kennedy in 1960, Heather, where you had kind of an old politics give way to a new politics. John F. Kennedy said, we're passing the torch to a new generation. And I think in a way that's what Harris epitomizes for me.
And I think she's so terrific at a rally. I mean, I really like seeing what she did in Georgia, and I think there's going to be more of that. The debate, you and I will be watching it. Everyone at home or not at home on your commute, whatever, it'll be nighttime. You're probably at home. You can watch with us.
Have you been following, Heather, the debate inside the debate over muting the mute button? This is actually fabulous. It's very indicative. Team Trump wants the rule to be that when Harris is speaking, Trump has to be muted. And when Trump is speaking, Harris has to be muted. Now that's Team Trump is insisting on that. Team Harris says no. When I'm speaking, when Harris is speaking, Trump ought to be, the microphone should not be muted. Trump ought to be allowed to be heard. So in other words, Team Trump doesn't trust that Trump can control himself when Harris is speaking and is worried that the public is going to see somebody out of control.
Oh, for sure. And they're all, and he'll say, what? What do you mean the mic's muted? And then they'll say, oh, I mean, I wasn't sure who did that. And then they'll run behind him and try and say, mute the mics, mute the mics. I mean, of course. And he is not going to want them muted. And they are praying that they are muted.
Well, that's really one of the sticking points right now on having the debate. Is it muted or unmuted? And it's fascinating in terms of which side wants muted.
I'm very excited for that debate. But again, this age of anticipation, it's kind of this roller coaster of my adrenal glands are, tapped out. It's a lot.
I'm sorry to hear that. I mean,
how are yours?
Mine adrenal glands are just great. I mean, I don't want to get too personal, but thank you for asking.
I always care about your adrenal glands.
Well,
okay, so that's the future. More about the future is Labor Day is coming up, and you are a former Secretary of Labor, so I'm excited to have a coffee with you always, but this seems particularly exciting.
Listen, Labor Day is my day. I used to say Labor Day, this is the day of the American workforce, and it is a big deal. I mean, the American workers have a lot to celebrate. Still, in real wages, in terms of real wages, they are coming back. But it's very important that, and I don't want to get too wonky here, but it's very important that the Fed start lowering interest rates as soon as possible.
Well, I do think things are looking good in that department. But in terms of labor, I mean, you've talked about these larger arcs of history. So let's think about defense and offense, right? It feels like labor has had to be on defense for a long time. Are we moving towards an offensive position? Is it getting better? What's happening?
Well, it's getting better slowly, but I just want to give you some framework to understand this. In 1935, you had about 20% of American workforce were unionized. By 1950, you had 35% of the American workforce was unionized. Now today, 6%. 6% of the private sector workforce is unionized. You now have some public sector unions, but this is a huge drop in terms of unionization. It's very hard for American workers to do better if they don't have the negotiating and bargaining power that comes with unions.
That's it. And you've talked about this over the years, the power between corporations, corporate power, and the power of workers and the need for countervailing power. What's happening with the latest in terms of this antitrust and this? There's been such interesting stuff, Kroger and otherwise.
This is fascinating because the Federal Trade Commission, where I used to work, has taken on Kroger, this giant grocery machine, and Albertsons, and they want to merge. And they would be, if they merge, I mean, the two largest grocery chains in the United States want to merge. Talk about lack of competition. Talk about monopolies. And the Federal Trade Commission is saying, no, you can't do that. Not only because it would drive consumer grocery prices even higher than they are today, and even result in even less competition in the grocery industry, but you can't do it because it would also harm the 700,000 workers who are Kroger and Albertsons workers, because if you merge together, they would only have one take it or leave it giant corporation to negotiate with. This is what's fascinating here is that this is the first time, Heather, to my knowledge, that antitrust authorities in the body, this is the Federal Trade Commission, have said workers and worker power is part of what we care about.
That's it. And really quantified it in this way and talked about these individual workers and the lack of power and bargaining power that they'll have.
It's a very, very big deal. This went to trial. This Alberts-Krogerson's merger went to trial last week. It's going to have huge implications. And just a few days ago, you had the key people, and I want to make sure everybody knows we're talking about Lena Khan, and we're talking about Jonathan Cantor at the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department, and Jennifer Abruzzo, who is the General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. All of them got together, signed an agreement which is historical in terms of working even more closely together on issues of antitrust and worker rights and worker strengthening unions.
Right. And then, of course, we have Kamala Harris talking about putting regulations around price gouging. And Kroger admitted this week, as part of the trial, that they were price gouging as it relates to the cost and what they were charging for eggs and milk.
Can you imagine?
Admitted it.
Can you imagine admitting price gouging when you have Kamala Harris saying she is supporting legislation against price gouging, and you have so many millions and millions of Americans who are saying we can't afford the price of groceries and the price of food, which is a huge deal. Trump obviously is mum about all of this.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to try a new something at the end of our Coffee Klatches.
Yeah. This worries me.
It's not a segment. It's not a. I don't know. Let's just try it. So what it is, it's rapid fire questions. And I'm going to come up with some questions. You mean I can
give you rapid fire questions, or you can give me?
Well, because this is my vision, as I see it, I ask you the questions. But maybe next week, if you suggest something, you can ask me the questions.
Good.
But so I was thinking it would be fun. And then I was thinking if the other people have questions they want me to ask you, they could throw those in the comments.
Okay.
But so what if I said to you, let me come up with a good one.
Oh, we're going to do it now. Okay. Yep.
I think we should
I'm
do it now.
bracing myself. Yes.
Okay, brace yourself. And thank you for being down. Okay, describe America in 5 adjectives. Go.
Upbeat, idealistic, exhausted, courageous,
one more.
Ambitious.
Ooh, good ones. And they skew positive and hopeful.
Yeah, it's because my head is now positive and hopeful.
Yeah,
I wasn't there. If you would have asked me, a month or 5 weeks ago.
I know you and everyone else.
Yeah. Well, it's only been, it's amazing. July 21st marked a different era in American politics and economics. We're not just talking about politics. We're talking about the culture and the feeling that people have. So
also my mother's birthday.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Well, that was July 21st.
Well,
this has been fun.
Anyway to your mother.
Okay, I'll let her
How
know.
about
You're very kind.
Give me 5 adjectives about your mother.
Gorgeous, thoughtful, intuitive, kind, and maternal.
Oh, I love the maternal adjective. That's really good.
Oh.
Listen, everybody, Heather, thank you so much. Kyle, thank you for your help on the technology side. We will see all of you next week, next Saturday, for another Coffee Klatch. Thanks for joining us.